Hi all, welcome to my channel Satish Vlogs. In this video, I would be explaining the concept of accrued expense. What is an accrued expense? An expense which is incurred but which is yet to be paid, right? With this note, let's get into the further details. Yeah, in this slide, there is a diagram which depicts like a cycle. This cycle is nothing but the accounting cycle. What is an accounting cycle? What are the various phases of an accounting cycle? All those details I have shared in my previous video on accounting cycle, and the link for that video I would be giving in the below box. I request the viewers to go through that video before getting into the details of the current video on accrued expense in order to gain better understanding of the current concept. Hope this is clear. Okay? Yeah. I would like to explain each and every of my concept with an example and considering the phases of a business cycle. For the current concept, I would be considering the example as a rent expense. Rent expense is a business transaction as part of my first phase of the business cycle, accounting cycle, right? Yeah. So whether this rent expense has been paid in the current accounting period or it would be paid at a later date, all those details would be decided as part of the terms which are being agreed in the lease agreement with the lessor. Okay. If in the lease agreement it is clearly stated the rent for the period, which means from first of the month till last day of the month, it is clearly stated the rent would be paid on last day of the month, which means the rent is incurred in the same accounting period which would be paid in the same accounting period. Then in such a case, the concept of accrued expense doesn't arise. However, if in the lease agreement it is clearly stated the rent for the current period, that is for the period from first of the current month till the last day of the current month, the rent would be paid by 5th of the following month or 10th of the following month, then in such a case the concept of accrued expense would get arises because the rent would get incurred, however, which would be paid in the following month. So for the current month, we need to show that expense as an accrued expense. Hope this is clear. Now we are done with the first phase of the accounting cycle. Let's move to the next phase of the accounting cycle, which is journalizing. Now, for posting the journal entries, as everybody aware, we follow the concept of double entry system of bookkeeping, which means for every debit there will be an opposite and equivalent credit for the same amount, which means there will not be any discrepancy between debit entry and credit entry. The amount should get matches up. Okay. So for the rent expense, as the rent would be incurring in the current period, so the rent expense needs to be debited. However, it will not be paid in the current period. It would be paid at the later date or in the following month. So for that purpose, we would be crediting the accrued rent account. As everybody aware, the 3 golden rules of an accounting, right? What are those golden rules? First one is the real account, which means debit the receiver, credit the giver. Second one is the nominal account, debit all expenses and losses, credit all incomes and gains. And the third one is the personal account, debit the receiver, credit the giver. So here the rent expense is the nominal account. What is the rule for the nominal account? Debit all expenses and losses. Credit all incomes and gains. Rent expense is an expense. So for that reason, we are debiting it. And what about this accrued rent account? Is it nominal account? No. This is a representative personal account because this accrued rent belongs to the lessor. This accrued rent is representing lessor. So we need to treat this expense as a representative personal account. We are crediting it because it is a personal account. We are paying to lessor, so for that reason we are creating the lessor. However, we are creating to the representative personal account, which is accrued rent account. Okay, hope this is clear. Let's move to the third phase of the accounting, which is ledger posting or ledger creation. Okay, what is this all about? For whatever the journal entries we are created as part of journalizing, for all those journal entries, a ledger accounts would be created in the third phase. So how many journal entries are there? How many journal accounts are there? There are two journal accounts. What are those accounts? Rent expense account and the other one is the accrued rent account. So for these two accounts, we would be creating the ledger accounts as part of the first phase. Okay, and the entries would be posted in the respective ledger accounts. What are those respective ledger accounts? Rent expense account and the other one would be the accrued rent account. Okay, hope this is clear. Let's move to the fourth phase of the accounting, which is trial balance. What is a trial balance? This is nothing but the summary of all the ledger accounts. How many ledger accounts we have created in third phase? As part of the third phase, two accounts. What are those accounts? Rent expense account and the other one would be the accrued rent account. So the balances pertaining to those two ledger accounts would be shown as part of the trial balance. Okay, the trial balance would get matches up because as we have been following double entry system of accounting, there will not be any discrepancies in the balances. The debit should match up with the credit balance. Okay, now let's move to the last phase of the accounting cycle, which is financial statements. Okay, this rent expense is an expense, right? So it will directly hit the income statement as a debit. Okay, what about this accrued rent? Accrued rent, we have accrued it, but which is yet to be paid, which means liability to the organization or entity. So in the balance sheet, we should show this accrued rent under the current liabilities, under liabilities in the balance sheet. Okay, hope this is clear. With this, I hope everybody are clear what is this accrued expense, how this accrued expense needs to be treated in the financial statements. If you guys really like of this video, request you to like it and share it to your friends and subscribe my channel for more videos. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next video. Hi all, welcome to my channel Satish Vlogs. In this video, I would be explaining the concept of prepaid expense. What is a prepaid expense? What are the journal entries for prepaid expense? How this prepaid expense should get reported in the financial statements? All these details I would be providing in this video. With the description of the current concept, which is a prepaid expense, we can easily make out this is something related to the prepaid, which means paid in advance. Okay, so which means whatever the amount which is paid in advance doesn't directly hit the entire amount in the current period's income statement. There could be possibility that some amount or expense is pertaining to the future period. Okay, and the examples for the prepaid expenses are if the business entity has bought the term plans on the life of their employees, then whatever the premium which has been paid by the business entity for their employees would be a prepaid insurance, because the risk would get covered only if the premium is paid in advance. However, the benefits out of it would get generated when actually the event arises, right? Or if the business entity has bought the medical insurance benefit for their employees, then business entity is supposed to pay the insurance premiums on the medical insurance benefits which are being purchased on behalf of their employees, right? So for that, the business entity is supposed to pay the premium in advance. However, the benefits out of it would get enjoyed or arised only when the actual event arises in the future, right? Similarly, the another example for prepaid expense is subscriptions. Normally, the business entity bought the subscriptions for the recreation of their employees, right? Like social memberships or golf course subscriptions or subscriptions which are being purchased for the entertainment of their employees, etc. Like even the subscription amounts which are being paid for buying the Netflix, or even the Prime membership, etc. All these would be categorized under prepaid expenses. Okay. With this introduction, let's move to the next slide of my video. In this slide, there is a diagram which depicts like a cycle. This is nothing but the accounting cycle. What is an accounting cycle? What are the various phases of an accounting cycle? All those details I had already provided in my previous video on accounting cycle. I request the viewers to go through that video before getting into the details of the current video in order to gain better understanding of the current concept on prepaid expense. As mentioned previously, I would be explaining my concept considering the phases of an accounting cycle. As a first phase of an accounting cycle, which is a business transaction, prepaid expense is a business transaction. Hope this is clear. Now let's move to the next phase of an accounting cycle, which is a generalizing phase. What is a generalizing phase? For whatever the business transaction, for that journal entries are required to be created, right? What is a journal entry for prepaid expense? Prepaid expense is a real account, which means what is the golden rule for a real account? Debit what comes in and credit what goes out. The business entity would be receiving the benefit in terms of a prepaid expense. So the prepaid expense should be debited, right? However, the business entity would not be receiving this benefit at a free of cost. The business entity is supposed to pay the consideration in terms of bank or cash. So the bank needs to be credited. So what is the entry? Prepaid expense account at R2 bank account, right? Hope this is clear. Now let's move to the third phase of an accounting cycle, which is a ledger postings phase. What is the ledger postings phase? For whatever the entries which were created as part of the generalizing phase, for those entries the ledger accounts are supposed to be created and entries are required to be posted in the respective ledger accounts accordingly. Okay. So we have posted two entries as part of the generalizing phase, right? One is the prepaid expense account and the other is the bank account. So we would be creating the ledger accounts for these two accounts and the entries would be posted accordingly. Now let's move to the fourth phase of an accounting cycle, which is a trial balance phase. What is this phase all about? Trial balance is nothing but the summary of the balances of the ledger accounts. So we have opened two ledger accounts as part of the third phase of an accounting cycle. One is the prepaid expense account and the other one is the bank account. So the balances for these two accounts are required to be updated in trial balance phase. So whatever the amounts which are shown under debit side in the trial balance should matches up with the balances which are shown under credit side of the trial balance. There shouldn't be any discrepancy, because as we have been following double entry system of bookkeeping, there shouldn't be any discrepancies, and the amounts which are shown under debit side should matches up with the credit side. Okay. Now let's move to the last phase of an accounting cycle, which is a financial statements phase. What are the key statements as part of the financial statements? One is the income statement and the other one is the balance sheet. As stated previously, as this prepaid expense is a real account, this doesn't directly impact my income statement, because the income statement normally gets impacted because of the accounts which are falling under nominal accounts, right? So there will not be any posting in the income statement for this particular entry. Okay. However, while coming to the balance sheet, whatever the prepaid expense which has been paid, that amount or that account would be reported under current assets in the balance sheet. And while there is one more account which is a bank account, that would be reported with a negative signage under current assets in the balance sheet. Okay. So there shouldn't be any discrepancy in amount, and the balances in the balance sheet should matches up. Okay. Hope this is clear. Now in this video I have explained the concept of prepaid expense. Now we wanted to understand how this prepaid expense needs to be expensed or amortized. All those details I would be providing in my future video on amortization of prepaid expense, and the same will be posted in my channel soon. Okay. If the viewers like this video, request you to like it and share it to your friends and subscribe my channel for more videos. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next video. Hi all, welcome to my channel Satish Vlogs. In this video, I would be explaining the concept of amortization of prepaid expense. What is a amortization of prepaid expense? What are the journal entries for amortization of prepaid expense? How this amortization of prepaid expense should get recorded in financial statements? All these details I would be providing in this video. In my previous video, I had shared the details on prepaid expense. So whatever the expense which has been incurred, the benefits from that expenditure would get generated over a period of time. So during that period of time, this amount would be expensed proportionately in the income statement. So with this introduction, let's move to the next slide of my video. In this video, there is a diagram which depicts like a cycle. This is nothing but the accounting cycle. What is an accounting cycle? What are the various phases of an accounting cycle? All these details I had already shared in my previous video on accounting cycle. And also this amortization is related to the prepaid expense. What is a prepaid expense? What are the journal entries for prepaid expense? How this prepaid expense should get recognized in the financial statements? All these details even I had provided in my previous video on prepaid expense. I request the viewers to go through those two videos before getting into the details of the current video for better understanding of the concept on amortization of prepaid expense. as mentioned earlier, I would be explaining my concept considering the phases of an accounting cycle. The first phase of an accounting cycle is business transaction, which is nothing but the amortization of prepaid expense is my business transaction. Hope this is clear. Now let's move to the second phase of my accounting cycle, which is generalizing phase. What is a generalizing phase? For the business transaction, the journal entries would be created in this phase. So the prepaid expense needs to be recognized as an expense for the current period, right? So as I need to recognize the expense, where the expense is supposed to be shown, expense needs to be debited, because as the expense falls under nominal account, whatever the as per the golden rule of the nominal account, all expenses and losses needs to be debited and all incomes and gains needs to be credited. So as I would be charging as an expense in the income statement, so my expense needs to be debited, right? Which account needs to be credited? As I would be reducing my prepaid expense which was already incurred previously, that prepaid account needs to be credited, right? Hope this is clear. Now the entry is expense account data to prepaid expense account. Okay. Now let's move to the third phase of an accounting cycle, which is ledger posting phase. What is a ledger posting phase? For whatever the entries which were journal entries which were created as part of generalizing phase, for those entries I need to create the ledger accounts and the entries are required to be posted accordingly. Okay. So for which accounts the journal entries were created as part of the second phase of my accounting cycle, expense account and the prepaid expense account. So for these two accounts, the ledger postings are supposed to be created and the entries needs to be made accordingly. Okay. Now let's move to the fourth phase of the accounting cycle, which is trial balance phase. What is a trial balance? Which is nothing but the summary of the balances of the ledger accounts. So the balances for the expense account and the prepaid expense account are required to be updated in the trial balance. The balances under the debit should matches up with the balances which are shown under credit, because as we have been following double entry system of bookkeeping, there shouldn't be any discrepancy between debits and credits. Now let's move to the last phase of an accounting cycle, which is a financial statements phase. What are the critical statements as part of the financial statements? One is the income statement and the other one is the balance sheet. In the income statement, as I had already mentioned, the expense needs to be charged. So the expense would directly hit as a debit in the income statement, right? Which is already available in the trial balance. Now, what is the other account? Which is a prepaid account that will directly already available in my balance sheet, right? And I would be reducing my prepaid expense to the extent of the expense which has been moved to the income statement in the current period, right? Yeah, hope this is clear. I hope the viewers are able to understand how the amortization of prepaid expense needs to be done, what are the journal entries for amortization of prepaid expense, how this needs to be reported in the financial statements, all these details. If the viewers like this video, request you to like it, share it to your friends and subscribe my channel for more videos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.